CNN had a bombshell story last night that a new criminal investigation had been opened into former President Donald Trump. A lot of different outlets jumped on it. They got different details, so I wanted to pull together the different pieces that were only reported by each outlet, CNN, Politico, Washington Post, New York Times, and sort of bring them together so you folks can have a sort of complete picture of what's going on. Let's start with CNN, since they're the ones who broke the story. The new development is coming from the office of the New York Attorney General Letitia James, and if you're not familiar with all the ins and outs of this, you have district attorneys, you have attorneys general. Attorney General in this case is a state office. This is not a federal jurisdiction whatsoever. This is a state office. They are joining the Manhattan District Attorney's office in an ongoing criminal investigation. So Manhattan is New York County. This is a county official. That's the New York District Attorney, New York County District Attorney, is now teaming up with the state Attorney General Letitia James. James's spokesperson, Fabien Levy, told CNN in a statement last night, quote, "We have informed the Trump Organization that our investigation into the organization is no longer purely civil in nature." I'll explain that in a second. "We are now actively investigating the Trump Organization in a criminal capacity. Along with the Manhattan DA, we have no additional comment." So a civil investigation means you can go to court just like anyone would sue anyone else and say, you can pursue fines from the court, you can pursue legal remedies like a settlement, a financial settlement. Basically, you can go after their money and their assets. What you can't do in a civil suit is pursue what you can do in a criminal suit, a criminal prosecution, which is arrest people and throw them in jail. That's the difference here. Both of them have been looking into whether the Trump Organization misled investors in his properties, as well as misled, allegedly, insurance companies about the properties. Now, what this involves specifically is two investigators with Letitia James's office who are steeped in knowledge, this is from CNN again, who are steeped in knowledge about the Trump Organization, have now joined the district attorney's team. So they're basically joining forces, and that has some implications as well. So the Office of the Attorney General in New York has been looking into things like whether or not the Trump Organization, and this is from CNN's reporting, whether or not the Trump Organization improperly inflated assets on financial statements to secure loans and obtain economic and tax benefits, as well as how Trump Organization employees were compensated. Now, essentially what that means is, if I have a property, I don't want to pay a lot of taxes on it, so I tell the government it's not worth a lot. I tell the insurance company, well, you could go either way with the insurance company, but if, for instance, I wanted to have my insurance rates be low, then I tell them it's not worth a lot. On the other hand, I tell investors that it is worth a lot because I want them to invest with me and I want to get better terms on my loans, so I inflate the value. And as we know, in 2019, former Trump attorney Michael Cohen testified before Congress, it was all over TV, that Trump's annual financial statements inflated the value of his assets to secure favorable loans. In other words, look at all the collateral I've got because my properties are worth so much, and insurance coverage, but deflated the value of other assets to reduce real estate taxes. So we told one group of people it was worth a lot to get the benefit from that, told another group it wasn't worth a lot to get the benefit of that. Now, some of that might be civil, but if it's fraud, because you're making statements under penalty of law, if it's fraud, now we're talking criminal remedies. Investigators have already deposed multiple Trump Organization officials, CNN reports, including Eric Trump, the former president's son, which we knew. A judge ordered him last fall to testify, and Chief Financial Officer Alan Weisselberg. We've got some fun information about Weisselberg and his family coming up. Trump's longtime tax attorney, Sherry Dillon, was also deposed, but the state, that's Letitia James, says she declined to answer certain questions. Now, the properties involved here that are being scrutinized include Seven Springs Estate in Westchester County, New York, or as he told investors, it's 10 Springs Estate. And then he told the tax officials, it's only 3 Springs Estate. That was my attempt at a joke. I apologize. Okay, 40 Wall Street, obviously on Wall Street in Manhattan, Trump International Hotel and Tower in Chicago, and the Trump National Golf Club in Los Angeles. So we're talking about multiple properties here. All right, let's go to Politico, which adds that Jen Weisselberg, the former daughter-in-law of Alan Weisselberg, the Trump Organization's CFO, has said that she is cooperating already with both probes, both the New York County District Attorney as well as the New York State Attorney General. Now, here's where things get interesting on the New York County District Attorney. This is Cyrus Vance Jr. He's stepping down December 31st, and he's not running for re-election. I should also add that his office has also been scrutinizing possible hush money payments to women that Trump was involved with. The reason it's important that Vance is stepping down and not running for re-election is that it's pretty widely expected that he's going to want to resolve this case before he leaves office. You want that to happen on your watch, right? So the expectation is that he's going to try to move quickly, if not to wrap things up, then at least to take things to trial or get a plea. In terms of the tax aspect here, the New York Times had a big report, of course, last year. Was it last year? Yes. Reporting that Trump has paid very little in taxes. They obtained some of his financial records, including one year, just $750. Trump, by the way, of course, called that fake news and has denied, and we should take this seriously, has denied all allegations of wrongdoing. We should take it seriously, not because we're obliged to believe him, but we're obliged to, at least in the judicial system, ascribe to him the presumption of innocence. We also know from Politico that law enforcement officials, quoting Politico now, law enforcement officials in Florida have been preparing for the scenario in which Vance, that's the New York County District Attorney, could potentially indict Trump while he's at his Mar-a-Lago club in Florida. In other words, Florida police are trying to figure out, what do we do if the New York County District Attorney tells us, you've got a criminal there and I'm going to be prosecuting him, so hand him over. The New York Times gives us, this is the interesting tidbit on Weisselberg. That's the CFO of the Trump Organization. Here's what the New York Times reports, quote, "For months, the district attorney's office has focused on Mr. Trump's long-serving chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg, mounting an aggressive effort to gain his cooperation against Mr. Trump and the Trump Organization, according to people with knowledge of the matter." Now, how do you do that? Here's how you do that. As part of that effort, the New York Times reports, the district attorney has subpoenaed records from Mr. Weisselberg's bank and the private school in Manhattan that his grandchildren have attended. Now, you can make a case, speculating here, that there's a legitimate reason to go after the records from the private school where the guy's grandchildren attend, because those records might reveal something or might include financial claims about the assets they do and do not have, their ability to pay, so on and so forth. That might actually be relevant to determine the truthfulness of what Weisselberg has said about his compensation levels, his assets, his revenue, all those things. It might also be that it's a total stretch to just tell Weisselberg, we're going to make life miserable for everyone around you until you start to sing. All right, Washington Post. Let's see what the Washington Post had to say. The Washington Post went to Eric Trump for a response. Eric Trump, as I mentioned before, has already been deposed. He has testified under oath in this case. So they asked Eric Trump what was his response to the fact that Letitia James has now gotten involved in criminal investigation. Eric Trump did not respond. Instead, quoting the Washington Post now again, instead, Eric Trump texted the Washington Post a video montage of speeches that had been made by Letitia James, largely from her 2018 campaign, in which James criticized Trump and promised to challenge his policies and investigate his business. In one clip, James described Trump as an illegitimate president. In another from James's campaign, she said, quote, "We're definitely going to sue him. He's going to know my name personally." Well, obviously, that worked. The reason that's potentially problematic, though, is Trump's defense attorneys can now make the argument in court that James had a political motive to act on her promise to investigate. In other words, they can make the case that prosecutors working for her were incentivized to gin up charges, right? And that's not on the face of it false. There is now a political motive to follow through on that investigation. James, of course, can argue that Trump's criminality was so clear, was so blatant, that this was a non-remarkable thing for me to say. Of course I will prosecute crime. Of course that's what crime looks like. We also learned from the Washington Post that this notice from James's office actually, it's not new. It went to Trump's attorneys in late April. So this has been hanging out there for a couple weeks now. One other note about Vance, that's the New York County District Attorney, and James, Letitia James, that's the New York State Attorney General. According to the Washington Post, they've also teamed up in a state court level investigation of Stephen K. Bannon, the former advisor to Trump, who was indicted in federal court for allegedly defrauding contributors to a private fundraising campaign. Trump pardoned Bannon, but of course, the president has no power, zero power, to pardon someone at a state level. No jurisdiction, no power to do that. So Bannon is also being squeezed, and it could be again that the case against Bannon is on the merits. It could also be that they're pursuing it simply in hopes that the pressure, and again, if he's innocent, the pressure should be minimal, that the pressure of facing these potential charges could incentivize Bannon to cooperate with their Trump investigations. The Washington Post also adds that both Vance and James have issued subpoenas for other records that are relevant to their examinations and have interviewed a number of witnesses. So it's not necessarily just the Trump financial records that we knew about. And one last note before we go to the live chat is that Trump is actually facing investigations, separate criminal investigations from five separate law enforcement officials in New York State, Georgia, and Washington, D.C. We've just covered two of them. Quick review, courtesy of CNN, of the other three. In Georgia, Republican Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger is investigating whether or not Trump broke the law in that phone call when he pushed Raffensperger to find votes, and also whether he did the same thing to a Georgia election investigator in a call on December 23rd. If Raffensperger decides that, yes, there is cause for a criminal prosecution here, he'll refer the case to Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis, who is already conducting her own criminal investigation of Trump for possible interference in the election. In Washington, D.C., Karl Racine, elected in 2015, the first elected Attorney General for the District of Columbia, has limited powers, but is looking at Trump for possible charges of incitement of violence related to an incident on January 6th when Donald Trump, as president, told his supporters that they had to fight for him to preserve his presidency against a corrupt and illegal coup by election officials and judges around the country who were apparently conspiring to elect Joe Biden. They, of course, conducted themselves violently, injuring multiple police officers, perhaps contributing to the death of one. And that's what incitement of violence looks like. And so that's the fifth potential criminal investigation now underway, which could, of course, end up being wrapped up into the federal investigation into what happened on January 6th. So if, as I mentioned earlier, If you don't already, I'm about to go to live chat, hear what you folks have to say, answer whatever questions I can. And so I hope you'll subscribe if you don't already to join that in the future, including, as I mentioned, later today, we're going to do this again because we're breaking a story with national implications that I hope you'll join us for. And if you're not watching us live, take care of each other, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you soon.